How glorious does Lara look in the latest trailer though? I enjoyed the Reboot Trilogy as much as the next man, and perhaps more than most. But the Legend Trilogy will always hold a very special place in my heart. As a teenage boy in the 90s, I of course spent an inordinate amount of time with Lara Croft's first 5 outings, especially 2 and 3. I even muddled through with Angel of Darkness when I got to university, right through to the end credits.
Enough now.
But then we got Legend, and oh boy did I fall in love. For one thing, in an age of pre-remake Tifa, we had never ever seen a digital character look so unbelievably gorgeous, and I hadn't ever played a game so fast and fluid, but so precise and polished at the same time. I'm sure there were other games at the time that made the cut. A lot of my friends were into Soul Reaver, for example. But Tomb Raider Legend was the game that transitioned me from the PS2 to the Xbox 360 era. In a time of easily forgotten launch titles and a console that couldn't run Gears of War without overheating, Lara's first reboot was my go-to experience. Well, that and LEGO Star Wars anyway. Tomb Raider had always felt like a very solitary experience, which makes sense I guess. You'd imagine that tombs are quiet spaces after all. And yet Lara's return in Legend straight away gave us a much more personal and character-driven adventure. Revelations had dug into her past a little bit as a teenage raiding prodigy, but here we were thrown straight into a new take on the canon, showing Lara as a child surviving a plane crash, then transitioning straight into a supremely confident modern-day Lara with a modern setup and an online support team. And much like Lara, the game itself was delivered with buckets of confidence. You could just tell that Crystal Dynamics knew that they had nailed it. Somewhere between the jaw-dropping level of presentation, for the time anyway, Lara's astonishing levels of nimbleness, or maybe the fact that she's holding a casual conversation whilst throwing herself from a narrow ledge to a cliff edge without any climbing gear, or maybe just, I don't know, the live and effortless way she handstand flips from her fingertips to her feet before handing the controls over to you. The message was clear, Lara was back, and in so many ways, this was the way she was always supposed to be. From there, you had a brilliantly paced tutorial level that showcased the amazing new movement systems, the so fast it shouldn't work but it does combat, quick time events before they were universally hated, and an intriguing setup for a surprisingly accessible story. I mean, this was a game that would have you riding a motorcycle across rooftops in Japan, wielding Excalibur, and oh yeah, visiting Cornwall.
As in, take the M5 to the A30?
And yet it somehow held it all together with a very well paced, easy to follow story with a lot of character and heart at its core. We'd never seen Lara this human before, and certainly not with this many outfits to choose from. Working in unlockable rewards and the biggest, richest, most super fun to explore version of Lara's mansion ever was a genius move too. The Reboot Trilogy did a deep dive into Lara's psyche, but they did so after completely retconning her origin story. So whilst it was a fascinating and excellent journey all the same, it was a complete 180 from the Lara that we grew up with. For me, Legend was the peak of Lara's humanity, and even though Anniversary and Underworld were set in the same trilogy, I enjoyed Legend the most from a perspective of Lara being a human, and I really hope we get to see Lara as a confident and seasoned explorer again soon, and definitely outside of spin-off and mobile games.
Look, Mom!
On the subject of the trilogy, when Anniversary was announced, it was done so via a stunning trailer, showing off gameplay that would have seemed impossible before Legend. But here we were, a mere year later, witnessing a breathtaking combination of the mechanics of Legend and the very first Tomb Raider, and it was truly a match made in heaven. Whilst Legend is my favourite from a character perspective, Anniversary was my favourite in terms of pure gameplay, and it has held up astonishingly well for 2023. You also got the unlockables and challenges ported over from Legend, and I adored what they did with Croft Manor this time around. Expanding it to include parts of the grounds and changing some of the rooms to reflect how they were when they were under construction, the mansion was more beautiful than ever, and it was crammed full of Easter eggs, and it somehow managed to create an environment that once again captured the essence of Solitary, but at the same time made us feel right at home. This core philosophy extended all the way through the game too. Make no mistake, Anniversary was hard, like really surprisingly hard. Sure, we all knew the T-Rex fight was coming, but that turned out to be pretty forgiving. The platforming, on the other hand, was brutal. Koala Peck's tomb, for example, had these delightful corridors between the trial rooms. Well, I say corridors, what I actually mean is precarious points to balance on while traps are trying to kill you, and it only got more insane from there. The Colosseum stayed with me long after the credits rolled, and the entirety of Egypt really tested my abilities as a gamer. I would say I was glad that I stuck with it, but that would imply I considered putting the controller down, and that 100% did not happen, even with the difficulty. Sure, I had to take the occasional sanity break, but I was hooked on this one, and on rolling credits I jumped straight back in for time trials and outfits and cheats, and I'm glad that I did, because I never actually managed to beat the original game at the tender age of 12, but now I knew the full story, and it turns out that I was going to be very glad that I did. Enter Tomb Raider Underworld. At this point, Lara had truly made the leap to next gen. After setting the stage for something pretty messed up with a truly baffling what the f*** opening scene, we join Lara on a boat in the middle of nowhere. You get a short scene, and go. Lara's wetsuit makes you think you should probably jump into the water, and just like that, I had never ever seen a video game level open up on this scope before. The ocean seems to be truly limitless in scope, literally all around you. And oh yeah, there's a few sharks in there for good measure, because Tomb Raider.
Come here, what brings you here tonight?
I thought I might kill someone.
You keep going down to find some ruins, but there are multiple sets of ruins, and they're not exactly small. The two most universally reviled levels a game can have are escort missions and underwater missions, with MGS2 still firmly holding the top spot of worst mission ever for daring to combine the two.
What? What are you thinking?
So for Underworld to open up with an enormous underwater mission really does speak volumes about how much confidence Eidos had with Lara by this point. What I never expected was for Underworld to combine the stories from Anniversary and Legend, and bring it all full circle. Before the end of the first level, you are introduced to the two main antagonists of both of the previous games, and you're expected to know exactly who they are and what powers they have and what they've done. If you didn't, then you just had Legend and Anniversary thoroughly spoiled. Sorry. Underworld was significantly darker in tone, once again leaning far more towards solitary tomb exploration, and each of the levels was huge, like way bigger than we'd ever had before, and they were a significant departure from the corridor designs of old. Underworld was tough but not unforgiving, and it's aged reasonably well in terms of playability. The designs of the tombs and traps were more imposing than we'd ever seen before, but all the same, this was an intimidating game for those who were not used to throwing Lara deep into the unknown. Speaking of darker tones and sheer intimidation, let's talk about Lara's shadow, her doppelganger. One of the most inventive parts of the original game, reinvented for Anniversary, and a crucial plot point in Underworld. Once the doppelganger joins the story here, the introductory scene makes complete sense, and her arc is certainly an interesting one. If you played the DLC, you'll know that being a superhero version of Lara didn't equate to an easier time of it, but more that you had to take on superhero levels of challenges instead. Between Legend letting you wield Excalibur and Underworld letting you wield Mjolnir, superpowers weren't exactly a new thing per se, but Lara's shadow might as well have been a combination of the Flash and the Hulk, and that was pretty damn cool. But rather than making her a bland copy who just blindly follows orders, we got an interesting take on a sentient creature locked into indentured servitude, and I for one loved seeing Lara immediately using her eventual control of the shadow to give her free will, and knowing exactly what her shadow was going to do with it, even if this means that the true end of the story was locked behind a DLC paywall.
What? Don't look at me like that. But they gotta pay.
Underworld was a solid conclusion to a fantastic trilogy, and it broke amazing new ground on what kind of adventures we could go on with Lara, though I personally feel it wasn't quite the standard set by Legend and Anniversary, and it didn't quite stick the landing at the end of the base game. We recently passed Lara's 25th anniversary, and whilst I am super giddy for the remastered original trilogy, I can't say that I was able to justify nearly £20 on a skin for Call of Duty, but to be fair, I did absolutely adore jet washing the original obstacle course. Whatever we get from Lara next, I really hope it takes us back to the seasoned Tomb Raider that we grew up with. And if it includes a Croft Manor complete with a freezer for Winston, then it'll be a day one purchase for me. Tell me what your memories of Lara are down in the comments. I'd love to know how you feel about Lara's reboots, her highs and lows, and her original polygonal outings back in the day. Thank you very much for watching. Baldy out.